It's Speaking with Gravity, and I'm Curvin.
I'm Ty.
I'm D.
Joshua, a.k.a. Garby.
All right, and on this podcast, we talk about mental health and how everything affects everything. With every episode, the goal is to have a conversation that's going to make you think, make you feel, make you do what is best for you. I'm a therapist. 3 of the 4 of us are therapists. We're working on him. But this isn't therapy. It's a podcast. And so now we're going to go right into, no guest today, so we're going to go right into the Twitter discussion by pretty dope person, if I say so myself, if I have to say so myself.
So our Twitter discussion, what you don't know can harm you. What you refuse to accept can delay you. What you take accountability for can empower you. What you let go of can free you. That's by none other than D. Carpenter, right? Adjacent to me. From Kodak Ready Consulting Services, of course. You can find her on Instagram. That's at Kodak Ready Consultant Services. Definitely look her up.
Yeah, on Instagram it's just at Kodak Ready.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah. And then she had on Facebook is at Kodak Ready Consulting Services. My bad, I messed that up.
No, you good. You
but
corrected.
I really liked that statement when I read it, and I was like, "Yo, let's highlight that." I don't know what could you elaborate on that? Is it too much to ask for you to elaborate on? I mean, I do feel like it's pretty self-explanatory, but it's just really dope, man. And your writing skills is phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
Ready for that book?
Yeah.
Right. I appreciate
Signed copy.
Yeah.
automatically. So for me, it was going back to our childhood conversations, where a lot of times we were told, "What you don't know, what they don't know, don't hurt us." And so, as I continue this self journey and as I continue to grow and working with other people, what we don't know is detrimental to us. It's detrimental to our physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and every element of our life. And so, what we, learn, we still have to accept and begin to process, because we can know something and not do anything with the information that we learn. And so that can prevent us from being able to grow and expand and develop as we should. Accountability, taking responsibility for yourself. I am my choices, and I am the decisions that I make for myself, and they do impact me and the people around me. And when I learn to take accountability for that, it gives me the ability to change the direction of the outcomes of my life. And then, what I learned to free myself from allows me to navigate and walk in my authenticness. So that was kind of my concept for it.
That's what's up. All right, QD of the hour. See, we can't even add that to that, can we?
Cutie of the Hour, which is another version of fun facts, information for you to be able to give to your friends, family, colleagues, co-workers, or church members. 10.5 million children lost a parent or caregiver because of COVID, and out of 150 children in the Americas, according to the research letter published in Journal of the American Medical Association, Pediatrics.
All right, and then episode intro.
If you have ever lost someone close to you, you realize that there is no definite right way to go through the experience. Today's topic is all about death, loss, and pain. The goal is to begin a conversation that will lead to preparation of what is inevitable in this thing we call life. We would love for you to stay and hopefully learn something from this heavy topic, but please be mindful of your ability to observe what we are presenting in this moment. If you need to, step away and return when you are ready, or go listen to another one of our episodes. If you are able to stay, let's create space and talk about grief.
So, what does it mean to hold space for grief.
That's big.
Hold space for grief.
Setting aside that time.
Yeah.
Setting aside that time. Setting aside.
Anybody, like, can you tell me the earliest memory you've had of loss, death, loss? Death or a loss. The earliest memory. Earliest now, not the heaviest one, I guess you could say.
Well, my earliest is probably one of my heaviest.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
One of my earliest. I'm gonna give you two because I don't know how old I was. One of my parents came home with a dog. I don't know who it was, and it wasn't like they went to the store and bought a dog. It was one of those, we see we pick one up and here it is, and then the dog was gone. Like I had spent some time with it, a couple of weeks with it, and then it was gone. So that was my earliest memory of a loss, and I remember feeling some type of way, but not knowing what I felt. Just know, like, oh, okay. And then the death part of it was losing my uncle, my dad's brother, even though I didn't know him as well at that time. And this had to be before I was 10, but I don't remember how old I was. But I remember losing him. I felt like my dad was upset or different. I couldn't explain it. And I didn't have a strong relationship for him, so it was kind of a strong relationship with my uncle. So for me, it was just kind of like, okay, this person was here. I used to see them all the time, or see them frequently, and I don't see them anymore. Those are my earliest memories. And you said your earliest memory is your heaviest one?
Yeah, so my earliest memory is my mom's death. So my biological mom died when I was 2, getting ready to turn 3.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, that changed the trajectory of my life from that moment forward. I can remember bits and pieces of that day distinctively. I can remember telling my brothers and sisters that my mama was gone. And I didn't really know what I was saying, but I was like, Mama gone. And, them finding out through me, but not finding out. Like, I can remember the conversation where they brought all the family in to come, because it was 5 of us. And, I can remember sitting down and them having to tell my older siblings, who were all at school during that time, that my mom had passed away.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably my introduction to grief, and probably the origin of my passion for working with people with grief.
Most definitely.
I guess for me, the earliest, which was associated with death, not necessarily a loss. Well, I mean it is, but death was a relative, my niece, my first niece actually. I may have been in high school around the time, but yeah, I really didn't know how to process it. Being a teenager, I think again those feelings of numbness. But yeah, that was the earliest. It wasn't the heaviest, but earliest for sure.
I want to say my earliest probably my cousin Miranda. I think I was probably like 8 years old. Some really early fond memories of her. It was probably my earliest really loss. And, I lost loved ones before that, but didn't really stick out to me as much. Being young, and probably the heaviest, probably my grandma. I grew up in a home with my grandma, so that was kind of tough. I feel like, afterwards, I feel like I don't know, it seems as though I wasn't as disciplined, I would say, maybe, afterwards, having that matriarch in the home with me. Yeah, so those are probably 2 that really stand out to me.
And what did y'all notice with people and the grief, the death that was going on at the time that we were talking about, what did y'all notice about adults, siblings, friends around you, how they were processing it?
I think the thing that I noticed first is that people didn't know what to say.
Mm.
People didn't know what to say. They didn't know how to say certain things. And I don't think that people really understood what that meant for us as children. And I think people were empathetic and they were sympathetic to us, but they didn't really know how that changed everything in that one moment. And I think that's common with grief, right? People don't know what to say, you know, and I'm sorry, you know, it's the first thing. And, you know, if they've been sick, they in a better place now. And a lot of times those words aren't as compassionate as people think they are.
Yeah.
Right? And I think people were uncomfortable being around us because they did not know how to, as we call it now, hold space. Like, right? They felt like they needed to say something to us to make us be okay. And the reality was there was nothing they could say that would make us okay. And that's kind of what that experience taught me early on.
Yeah, I was 23 when I lost my father, and I, thought I was prepared for it, if that makes sense. Like I thought I could handle it, and exactly what you're saying. People say things because they just want it to be better, or they want you to feel better. And I remember not remembering what people were saying. Like, somebody's talking to you, you hear words coming out of their mouth, especially the closer it was to that actual moment of me finding out that my father had died. And even just that wording, right? He passed away. No, he died. He gone. He's not coming back. And this is a heavy topic because even with that, not only did I not hear people, but for the longest, I didn't really do anything about it. It's just, he gone. Let me move on. Whatever that means. Like, let me move on. What does that mean? And, when you're going, I don't personally like doing grief counseling. But when you're going, and it's like, what does it mean to move on? I don't know. I don't. That's hard. That's hard to kind of figure out. What does that mean to me as an individual? And there was probably about 2.5 years I didn't know what it mean other than for me to kind of act out in not a way that he would that was a representation of me, of what I really wanted to be, or what he would have wanted me to be as a son. But it was just me, just doing stuff.
I think you're trying to adjust, though.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
and I think people take away from the notion of, because especially when you lose someone so close, the idea of how we perceive life has changed forever, right? And I think about even my first introduction to grief. Like, grief for me at 2 years old was different for grief for my sister who was 12 or 13, right? We lost the same person, but we lost two different people, right?
Yeah.
My brothers lost a totally different person, right? And even for a long time, at that time, I grew up with a lady who was close to my mom, and she raised me and one of my other siblings, and I often referred to her as mom. And for one of my brothers, that was very problematic, because me acknowledging her as mom to him was as if I was omitting who my biological mother was.
Yeah.
And then at that age, I couldn't understand what he was talking about. Like, yeah, I get that that's mom, but this is who's taking care of me. This is who's providing for me. So, I'm paying reverence to her role in my life. But to him, it was like, you don't understand what that means. And now as an adult, as I've gotten more acclimated in grief, I understood for him that was a part of grief for him. Like, to him, that was him saying that by me acknowledging someone else's mom was me kind of putting a nail in the coffin. You know what I'm saying? It was finalizing my mom's death. And I think that people don't always understand that grief doesn't have an ending when it comes to loss. And so when you talk about being able to move forward, it's really not that you're moving on and forgetting this person. It's that you're now having to adjust to life without this person.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And that's a day-by-day journey because it looks different for everyone.
Yes.
I think language is important too, and a lot of, like you mentioned earlier, Curvin, common things that we hear from people who are offering that emotional support to individuals who experienced a loss. But oftentimes, like you guys indicated, those things really aren't helpful, and they're unintentional about it. They're intentional with their ability to try to show support and comfort, but kind of unintentional how those things, it kind of just like, it offers no validation in a sense, so, oh, it was their time, God was ready for them. That's how do you know this individual identifies with any type of religious or spiritual beliefs first and foremost? And then it's kind of maybe saying, well, does that mean that they, just because it was their time that they were supposed to go, like, it still can kind of become invalidating of my feelings, and offer or just promote more feelings of hopelessness, and then can often lead to people becoming more isolated, people shutting down. So I think just learning what to say and what not to say, and being okay with, dang, I may have said the wrong thing because of my lack of knowledge around what to say, and then, just simply sometimes not saying anything, just your presence alone, or the simplest things. I'm sorry for your loss. Let me know how I can be of service or how I can help, or I don't know what you're going through, because just because I lost somebody and just because you lost somebody, I still don't know what you're really going through. Yeah, we may have similarities with losing somebody or losing something, because like we all know, grief, it isn't just about losing an individual. It can be because of loss of a job, loss of a neighborhood, like movement, different changes going on in our lives, pet, whatever the case may be. Just kind of learning I don't even want to say learning the appropriate language, because that varies too, but just being mindful, I guess, again, of what we're saying or suggesting to people who are experiencing grief and loss.
Like I went through it early, there's no definitive right way.
Right.
You can be there, but there's no right way. Going to what you were saying about, you made the statement that sometimes people can say it was their time, or God wanted them, right? Again, going to my dad, I'm a preacher's kid, so grew up in the church. Dad's a minister, and I remember at the time that it happened, we were all at the hospital, and my current pastor, he wasn't the pastor, my pastor at that time, but he was at the hospital with us, and he was, let us pray, and I feel like I'm a spiritual person, but in that moment, at that time in my life, I didn't want to pray. Right. I vividly remember that. Like, they said, let us pray, and I did not want to do it. And again, my pastor grabbed, well, he wasn't my pastor then, but he grabbed my hand. I just happened to be standing next to him, and he grabbed my hand. And there was a part of me that wanted to take my hand away, but I allowed him to hold my hand, and we kind of got together. I can't say in that moment that I felt better. I can't even say that. But I remember having that thought. That's probably been the only time that I didn't want to pray. And I'm saying that to say, you don't know what to say. You can, just because you're saying that doesn't mean that person's gonna say, oh, okay. It doesn't mean that you're absolutely wrong for saying that, but just know being there. Whatever you say, you'll figure it out after you're around that person for a period of time. That's another thing that I noticed with death too, is oftentimes, again, going back to my father, that, if I'm not mistaken, it happened on a Saturday. And I could be wrong about this, but I think he was buried on a Wednesday. But Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, a house full of people, a lot of support. And I remember going to the funeral on that Wednesday. I believe it was a Wednesday. But going to the funeral, kind of being alone even in that moment. Going to the funeral, having a funeral, and then bam, you got all of these people. And you see the support, and you like appreciative of that, being surrounded by the people. And then after dinner is done, that ride home, for us it was an extremely long ride home. And then you get to the house, and it's just walls.
Yeah.
You know, my siblings, my mom, and walls. And I want to say we went in separate rooms.
Yeah.
So, you know, that support afterwards, I've always, maybe not to the best of my ability, but I've always tried to be mindful of that and say, okay, everybody's there doing this first 2 or 3 days, but after that, I'm going to make sure I show my presence in some way, or I at least try to, because that's when I feel like it's needed the most, looking at my personal experience.
Yes.
But I think I kind of got off here a little bit. But
You never out when you talking about grief.
yeah.
Yeah.
And we said that all grief is different, and you mentioned it earlier. It is not just death. You know, it could be a loss of jobs. Yeah, because it's a change.
Relationship.
Yeah,
Loss of
relationship. Yeah.
Financial changes. Yeah. That's
It's drastic.
That's definitely a big one. Losing the ability to be physically independent, working in hospice, just experiencing individuals express, the lack of physical capabilities that they once were able to achieve, but just being able to remind them you still have other capabilities, but I know that may not be the appropriate thing, because that may be dismissing. I'm aware of that, but this is how I feel right now. I ain't able to do X, Y, and Z. So just, I guess, trying to highlight those things. I didn't mean to take it all the way there. But, yeah, different forms of loss.
Even if they do, if you're trying to highlight different capabilities, right, what I like to do is, instead of just flat out telling somebody, yo, you got different capabilities, asking it.
Yes.
And then hopefully allowing them to see it. Like, just asking a question, You could get mad at me for just asking a question, but that's what I'm doing, and I'm hoping that you'll gather from your answer that this is what it is. And if given the space and the opportunity, I'll share with you, like, this is where I was going with this, right? But asking that question can be helpful to get to that point.
I think you also have to be governed by relationship. And I think we've been talking about relationship in the past several episodes, but when someone is dealing with grief, relationship matters, right? For me, I've experienced grief in the multitudes of experiences, from relocation, from, my mother dying, like I said, at 3, and then my father dying when I was 16. And, my father was absent from my life until I was 12. And even then it was inconsistent. So there was a form of grief I had for him before due to his lack of involvement. But then there was a physical grief once he passed on. And it made it even harder because the week before my father passed, which I truly believe he understood that his time was approaching, he made amends for his lack of parental guidance and participation in my upbringing. And so, that was another form of grief, because here we are trying to establish a relationship, and then, life is calling. And then you have people who say it was his time. And I think, those people don't really know me. And so that notion of I feel alone, that's a valid feeling, because this experience, it doesn't mirror or match anyone else's. So in essence, there is an element of loneliness. But there is also importance and significance in recognizing the people around you. And I think what people sometimes do is people ask questions, well, how did they die, and all of these things. Sometimes those type of questions are inappropriate. So some of the things that I tell people is when you're trying to hold space for people is when asking a question, how does this question benefit you?
Exactly.
How does the information that you're seeking allow you to help the people who are living, right? Because the person that has passed away, we don't change anything. We can't alter anything from that beginning. So with that information, how does it improve the quality of life for the people that are still here? In my direct experience with grief, I also learned that there is a time and a place for everything, right? And I think what you mentioned earlier is most important is that silence is still support. And I don't think that people realize that when this person is grieving, silence is a measure of support. And this notion of what Kervin you mentioned is people wanting to run to the house. There was a time when I thought, that paying honors to people, but there's also a sacredness in allowing family to have their space. And I don't want to run to people's house anymore. That's not for me anymore because I just noticed from my own experience with grief that was overwhelming because I was already struggling to be okay, and now you're coming, and now I'm trying to entertain, I'm trying to do hospitality for you when honestly I'm struggling to even get up right now. Like I'm in a place of zonefulness, like I'm zoned out. It's not real to me yet. And so I think you really have to be mindful of how do I have a relationship with this person. Like I may just send a message, but I'll tell them, I'm not expecting you to call me back. I'm not expecting a response for you. I just want you to know that you're in my thoughts and my prayers. If I get an opportunity, I'll stop by. So I'm setting the stage, if it's okay. And I may ask before I come by, is it okay if we stop by? If you don't respond, then, you know what I'm saying, I'll take it as God. But unless we had this type of relationship, I may not come to your house. But I'm also still paying respect because if I want to go to the funeral, that's how I can do that. You know what I'm saying? Or if I want to check on you afterwards, that's how I can do that. And I think it comes with experience because sometimes if you ain't never experienced loss, you don't really know how to respond to it. Right? And so you grow through your experiences. But I think it's important when you don't know what to say, know that your words can be very much more harmful than they are helpful. So sometimes silence is significant.
I like what you said about relationship too, man, because sometimes if you got a great relationship with somebody and they say something wrong, it's still okay.
Yeah.
And also with that relationship, again, going back to my personal experience, I had one friend, we were roommates at the time. I believe he probably called me every hour on the hour, it seems like. And sometimes when he called me, I did not want to answer. This is when cell phones was just now kind of coming, being a thing. So he had access to me. But some of those times I didn't want to talk, but other times it was like, okay. And when he got on the phone, it wouldn't necessarily say, how you do it. We was just talking. Again, I remember my mom being around me like, is he calling again? But she didn't have that relationship with him. I did. So even though it was somewhat, I don't even want to say aggravating, but in that moment, I might not want to accept it in that moment sometimes. But overall, I'm so grateful for those calls back to back to back from him. It kind of kept me on my toes, but it came with us having that relationship. We had a good relationship then. It built our relationship. I had friends that I was probably thought I was closer with than him who had no idea what to do, what to say, how to interact with me, how to engage with me at that time. So,
can I ask you guys, who do you see yourself wanting to talk to when you're in those moments, when you're grieving or you're really dealing with loss? Who do you see yourselves wanting to talk to? Maybe it's nobody, but I feel as though I have select people in my life who I would go to if I wanted to talk to somebody. I like reflecting with myself first, of course, but there are like just a select handful that I'll go to. Do y'all have people like that in your lives?
I think right now, at this very moment, of course, my wife would be my go-to person, just because she's around me all the time. But if it was, if anything, depending on the person, if it's a family member, then I might go to a sibling more so than my mom. I mean, not my mom, my wife. Or if it was a sibling that it happened to, then I might go to my mom as opposed to my wife. But it's going to be somewhere within that circle of family for me. My wife, my siblings, my mom. I don't think, not to say that I wouldn't talk to anybody else about it, but me, myself, where I'm going to it, I'm initiating it, is going to be one of those persons. And yes, I do like to get to myself at different points in times. But I guess the biggest thing for me, more so than who I'm talking to, is the appropriateness of that time when I'm ready to process this now. You know, either by myself or I'm ready to process this with somebody else. So,
you know, some people like talking to people who don't really know them very well or don't really have a stake in that, in that experience that they're going through. Because oftentimes, some people sometimes just want to be heard, and when we're familiar with somebody, sometimes we try to offer words, like we've been saying, words of encouragement, advice. You should go about it this way. Sometimes people just want to be heard. They just want to know that you're listening to them. But yeah, sometimes I think it's really cool to have someone who you go to, even though I prefer going to myself at least first. But yeah, I think that can be really supportive. You can when you're able to lean on somebody a little bit, I think it can be good for your mental health sometimes.
I think you have to examine what support looks like for you. For some people, they don't have people to talk to.
Right.
A lot of times, when grief happens for individuals, sometimes the person they're losing is the person they would normally talk to, right? And so that's still another reminder that person is no longer here. And I think you just have to be able to really validate yourself in that moment. Oftentimes, when people respond to grief, I've met with a lot of people who said, "I feel like I'm going crazy," and there's validity in that. And it's not that you're going crazy; it's the fear of the unknown, because you have no idea what life is going to look like now,
right,
as a result of this loss that you've experienced. And I think when I'm working with people, one of my focuses is to really validate whatever emotional experience they're having. So if they want to sit in silence, we sit in silence. I normalize what it is that they're wanting to do. I know a lot of times, especially with children, when children lose people want them to talk about it. But I don't know how to talk about it yet, because, especially as a child, because I can't really put into words what I'm experiencing. And just because I can't put it into words doesn't make my experience any less real. It just means I'm not ready to talk about it yet. And when you're dealing with people or you're trying to hold space with people, you have to understand that in that moment, there really is not about you. Right? So if that person doesn't choose to come and talk to you, or, whether it's a close friend or whether it's a family member, they may not choose you. You know what I'm saying? They may, like you said, choose somebody that they don't know. One of them, when my mom died my freshman year in college, my foster mom died my freshman year in college, the person that comforted me the most was one of my one of the people that I met in college was her mom, right? She only had met me once, and that was on moving day. But her words was probably the most comforting words I heard during that entire time. And, and when she said it, it just so happened that I was in a spacing that I was able to receive what she was saying. Right?
Be in that space.
I don't know that if it had came from somebody else at that time, I would have received it the same way.
Yeah.
But in that moment when she called, I was open to hear what she had to say. Right? And I think that's really important in dealing with grief, is the fact that you don't understand what you're feeling. You're in the right space. because it is an unknown feeling. You've never had to experience this before. You've never been here before. Even if you've experienced loss, like the loss of my biological mom wasn't the same with the loss of my dad, and the loss of my dad was not the same with the loss of my foster mom, right? Each and every one of those losses were different. And I experienced other losses in between, having to relocate, my brother moving out, that was another form of loss, him not being home anymore, us getting evicted from one property, that was another form of loss. So there, grief was happening all around me in different formats, but all of them happened in different levels. And I think that when you really look to talk about people, you don't have to lose a person to understand grief, right? It's the feeling of, what do I do when something that is valuable to me is no longer present, regardless of what that value is, regardless of how much it owes. It's something to me, right? And there's some things that you can't even put a price tag on, right? So once I lose it, how do I feel?
So, when you say that, I know we don't want to generalize, right? We don't want to generalize, and we talked about grief being different at different points in times. Is there a different approach for a child instead of an adult? And you mentioned you didn't know the words at 2 to say. So, with this, and I don't know exactly about my like Ty, and I don't know exactly what I'm trying to ask, but I know.
How do you respond differently?
Each age, I feel like it's age groups. It's like it's periods of time that's gonna be different. Again, going back to my earliest memory, my uncle passed. He passed. He gone.
I think language is important. Like how we're talking past. Well, as a child who may be 3, 4, 5, when they think of past, that doesn't equate to death. So we have to be intentional about the language. Yeah, they died. Because if you tell me they passed, what they passed to? Then that brings about other questions. And we have to be okay with saying that word. Died. They transitioned on, or they died. They actually died. And then from there you can kind of further elaborate. But being intentional about the language and kind of being clear about it as well. How you deliver it, of course, is on you, but the language needs to stay the same. I personally think anyway, when it comes down to kids in different age groups.
I think you have to meet kids where they are, because some kids don't understand different things. And I think it depends on what they've kind of been taught up and taught. Like, we talked earlier about spirituality and some people believing, in one way. And so if your spirituality and that's what they're connected with, you may have to tie that in, right? You may have to connect it to, this person is going to be with, their father or this person, And for me, I can remember for a long time, they just told me my mama was sleeping, right? And I don't really know how I processed it. I don't know what it looks like. I don't even know if I understood sleeping, because even then in that statement, I'm thinking about you. Exactly. When she gonna get up? Exactly. You know what I'm saying? And so it really just depends on the development of that child. But I also think is because grief can be so different, you got to be careful and in alignment with your own emotional intelligence before you try to advise children about grief. Yeah. Because if I haven't processed my own feelings, I really can't take them to a space of understanding, right? I really have to sit with and be honest with them about my uncertainties. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure what this will look like for us, right? What I do know is there may be times when we are sad because we miss them and we love them, but a part of them will always be here with us, right? That doesn't change the love. So sometimes it's changing the focus, because I really can't give you explanation to something that I truly may not understand yet, right? My own understanding may not be there. And I think with children, you just have to kind of meet them where they are, because one of the things is children, just like adults, they have to digest death. And so they may have this question today. They may have this question 6 months from now. They may come back and go back to the original question 1 year later. But at that point, as they're progressing, you continue to be able to provide knowledge and understanding to them. And I think, like Ty said, the language is important. And sometimes children don't understand what's going on. and this is another reason why your own emotional intelligence is important, because am I projecting my pain and my sorrows onto them? I've dealt with a lot of children that they were like you. They didn't really understand death when it happened to them. So they weren't really struggling with it. They just didn't really understand it yet. Not to mean that at one point when they do get to an age where they can understand it, they won't have a difficult time. But where they were at that moment, they didn't understand it. But because the mother or the grandmother or whomever may have been struggling with it, they were projecting their emotions onto their child. Well, they're not sleeping at night. Well, let's be honest, they wasn't never sleeping at night. So that ain't, you know what I'm saying? That's not correlated to them being in that moment. And so really understanding what's going on, looking at what is really different. I only provide information when they ask questions, right? I don't try to force them to understand anything, right? You know, as we're transitioning through this decision making or whatever, and it varies for different people because different people feel different ways about responding. But those are things that you potentially have to take into consideration. Where is this child at right now? And what does their developmental capacity allow them to understand? There are certain things that I may want to tell them that they're not ready to understand yet. Doesn't mean that conversation won't come at a later time, but right now may not be the time.
And like you said, like you mentioned, that comes with intelligence, well, emotional intelligence as well. Because me, you know, when I'm talking to anyone, you know, even about loss or grief, you know, if I'm talking to a kid, I'm in kid mode. You know what I mean? I'm being cognizant of who I'm talking to and, you know, where to direct that conversation, you know, expectations. I'm processing all of that, like, really quickly. Same as when I'm talking to somebody, you know, in their 20s or somebody in their 50s, you know, that's, you know, it's going to be a difference. So, just being aware that, you know, those conversations are going to be different. And I wanted to ask y'all too, how, because I think we might have touched on it a little bit, but how would you say, you know, telling someone that it's not a good time? How do you tell someone it's not a good time for them to, you know, be talking to you about grief or about loss? You know?
When you say that, meaning after like I've experienced it, and
yeah, like say after I've experienced, you know, I'm going through grief, I'm going through a grieving process, and you know, someone wants to be there for me, but I don't really want them to be there for me right now. You know, I want to, you know, go through it myself right now. How to tell them, because a lot of people, even me, you know, I'm still being empathetic, you know, and I'm thinking about this person wants to be there for me. I don't really feel like it, but yeah, come on, you know what I mean? 'Cause I'm still thinking about them.
You got to put yourself first. So in that moment, if you know that you're not ready to receive the support that's being offered to you, now's not the time, but I appreciate it. Simply put.
Right.
And
Straight
if they
like
can't
that.
respect, straight like that. I mean, people may choose other words, but now it's not the time, but thank you. You know, I'm honored that you showed up and you're trying to offer your support, but this isn't the time for me. So I would expect, because I know we can't have expectations for people, but if I'm being clear with what I'm asking, I would expect for you to respect that. And if that means you just want to sit here in silence with me, I'm okay with that, but not engage in conversations with me at the moment. But I have to be okay with letting you know that and not just sit there and you just talking to me and I'm not even processing it. You know, for one, it's not fair to me and it's not fair to you either.
Facts.
So for me, I'm going to let you know now isn't the time. But thank you.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I agree wholeheartedly with that, right?
I think it can be troublesome. Yeah.
Yeah, just flat out saying, nah, this ain't the time.
And see, I would have trouble with that. Just speaking personally, like
But then you're forgetting about self, because what is self asking? If self is asking, I really ain't the time right now, you know, but I'm thinking about it. Then what about you?
I would just have to try to find a way to say it and convey, like, hey man, I don't know. I think it's tone too. Like,
Are you scared that they not gonna come back around when you're ready?
Nah, it's just I got like this thing about. Sometimes I have a thing about.
Don't get me started.
I guess saying the wrong. I mean, offending people. You know what I mean? Like I don't really want to offend you. So I'll probably say that what y'all said, but I'll probably just like be like. My emotional awareness will kick in then. Like, hey, this person is trying to be there So I just have to try to let them off easy. Is what I'll do.
Well, then you
But
setting yourself up for continuing to open up doors to be kind of passive
Mm-hmm.
with not being upfront with people with what it is that you need and how they can support you. So with you supporting me is you not asking me any questions right now, but me also letting you know that and me being okay, not having those feelings of guilt associated or, dang, I ain't had to. Yeah, you did, because that's what self needed in that moment in time. You were honest. You didn't have a mean demeanor. I'm sure your tone is, monotone. You weren't yelling at him, get out of it. I'm just asking you to respect that this isn't the time right now, but I appreciate you.
I like your tone. I like the tone there. I like that tone, yeah.
That's boundaries too.
I could probably do that. Yeah.
Setting up boundaries. And it might be one of those things where you have to say, you know what, let me go to therapy to see how I need to set these boundaries. How I need to tell people not to bother me right now. But I would say to that person that you don't want to be bothered by, right? It's okay for y'all to check back in.
Yeah.
Y'all can correct me if I'm wrong.
No,
with that,
I agree, because you need that support.
Yeah.
So telling them when to check back in, maybe, or check back with me later.
That might help you. For me, I'm not going to do that. Like, just don't bother me right now. If you check back in, you check back in. If you don't, you don't. But for you, that could help because you are still thinking about them. You are still cognitive of them. So, hey, right now, now is not the time. Hit me up next week. Or hit me up in about a month.
He said she ain't putting no team.
I'm not putting that time frame on it because I'm not doing. I don't think I want to set those expectations because I don't want to set expectations on them, and I don't want to set myself up to be disappointed.
Yeah.
So the reality,
if they don't.
Yeah, if they don't, because life. The one thing about grief, and it's hard to accept, is that life still goes on for the people around us.
Yeah.
Right. And for a moment, I explain to people this sometimes. To be honest with you, for a moment, life stops. For a moment, when you're experiencing direct grief, mentally, life stops for you because you can't see yourself moving forward past that moment, right? It doesn't mean that you physically, the world stopped, time stopped. But in a moment, I'm probably not processing anything that's happening around me. But the people around me are still living, right? The people around me still going to work, still doing what they got to do, still taking care of it. And so I can't expect you to stay in that moment with me forever, right, and wait on me. But what I can say is, you know what, I appreciate you for trying to be here right now. And, I'm just not in a place where I'm able to talk about this. But, when I am ready, you'll be one of the first people I reach out to, right? Because at that point, I don't put no expectation on you, but I also give myself the freedom. When I want to talk about it, I'll reach out to you. And so if you choose to check in on me, 2 weeks from now or a week from now, I know you said you'd reach out to me when you're ready. You just crossed on my mind. And that's the thing, though. Being upfront, I just wanted to check on you. I ain't looking for you to be up. And I say this but I think when people often want to check on people is you want them to be okay. But the truth of it is they're not going to be okay, right? And when they're going to be okay, we don't know what it's going to look like. When that time is going to come, I cannot tell you that. It may be 2 weeks from now. It may be 2 years from now. It may be 20 years from now. And I still may not be okay with it. And so, you know what I'm saying? What the support looks like, I may still need your support 20 years from now. And on that day where I'm just really thinking about my mom, or I'm thinking about my dad, or I'm thinking about that time, 20 years from now, I just might need you to sit down and listen to me, or be like, yeah, I remember your mom. She was really cool, really dope, nice person. You remind me so much of her. And I don't know that people realize how meaningful those conversations is, but it touched my heart when somebody say, I remind them of my mama. Right? Because I never got to know who she was.
Most definitely.
Right. Sharing memories is important.
Yeah. And so, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, in that first week or two, you might not have been able to support me. But in 20 years, 2 years, and I ain't saying that that's the only time, but those moments matter.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, that's honestly how I've been able to shift people's mindset is by getting them to talk about memories. Like, really getting them to talk about, what's the last thing you remember about that person prior to this experience? Because the experience you're in right now is one of the most painful. So let me take you to a moment that wasn't as painful for you. What was that about? What was that like? What is something they taught you? What is something they always wanted for you? And for me, I strive to always find the lesson in death.
Absolutely.
I always strive to find the lesson in loss. One of the greatest lessons that death taught me is that my mom had to die so that I could live, right? And when I learned that, like, it really changed my life forever. Do I still desire and miss that relationship and wish I would have had the opportunity? I do. But I realized she really had to die so that I could live, right? For me to be able to experience what I'm experiencing now, her life had to end. Because one of the things that I know was, I don't remember much, but I do remember my mom didn't see me as a person that could do no wrong, right? How dangerous would that be for me, right? If I grew up as a person thinking I could do no wrong and that I was untouchable or unstoppable, how different would my mindset be? How different would my response be? And it's a lot. And that's not the lesson that, my situation taught my sisters or my brothers, but it's something that it taught me, right? And the lesson that it also taught me in other aspects is that just because I move on don't mean other people do, right? I still got siblings that are still struggling with my mom's death. And if I be honest, they may be 30 or 40 years old, but they still 16 when it comes to the passing of my mother, right? Because they've never been in a place to be able to process that. And so how do I help you, right? I can try to move you forward, but I can't force you to go, right? I can't force you. And that's what really, when you're supporting people, I can only try to do so much, right? And so if what I'm saying to you doesn't seem like it's helping you, look, I can see that you're really struggling. You're still having a hard time. Have you considered talking to somebody? Because I don't have the answers, right? With my brother, I don't have the answers for him. As good as I feel like I may be, I don't have the answers for him because he doesn't see me in that capacity, right? He see me and his sister who don't know what she's talking about. So
Baby sister.
yeah, baby sister, right? You don't even know. You on the other stuff. So I can't really help him, right? But it doesn't mean that he doesn't need or desire help. It just he ain't gonna take it from me. And I think that's kind of the beauty of understanding. Just you may be able to help people differently in different experiences, right? And sometimes you may not be the help they need.
Well, a lot of times, like I say, you always bring home a lot of things when you're speaking, and when you were talking about recalling memories, even that is different for people, right? I remember people asking me like, "Why do you have a DVD of your dad's funeral, and why are you going back and looking at it?" Well, it helps me process some things. I love hearing the people dialogue about him at that funeral. I actually sung at the funeral, so I listened to myself like I could have did that better.
No.
But then my younger brother has tapes where he's on the tapes, and that's dope. I think it's my mom that has he used to preach, so some old tapes. All of that is good for me just to be able to hear that voice again. I can't physically touch him. I can't physically be there to see him, but I hear it. I hear and I hear his mannerisms. I hear his wisdom that he shared down with me in those little small, clips from time to time, and it kind of bring it back to life for a second. And then the other thing you were saying about time stopping for a second, I'm not gonna disagree with you. I like to think about it in the sense of I lost hope for a little while. I don't know if that's something totally different or not. But I think of it in the sense of death, but also like breakups. When I was heartbreaking, like I ain't gonna never find another girl.
That's funny.
I'm not gonna. I can't see myself dating right now and being committed to somebody else to feel like this again. Like, nah, hope gone for a little minute.
Can't
And
be
then it comes back.
I feel like grief can take your ability to be optimistic.
Yes, yeah, and somebody coming around, you like, man, I don't feel like being optimistic right now.
Yeah. Facts.
I don't want to hear that.
Don't wait it.
All right, did y'all have anything else y'all wanted to add? Want to talk about?
I wanted you to touch on. You brought it to my attention. Brought it to our attention. Yes. The 5 stages of grief.
Oh,
I just wanted you to touch on those because a lot of people might not
There are 5 stages of grief.
Yeah, I mean,
Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And D, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. They don't go in any certain order, right?
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Not linear.
Denial, that's kind of self-explanatory. Just it's not real.
They can't be dead.
Yeah.
Fighting it.
And for me, that denial came in that moment. And what was interesting for me, and when I say in that moment, like I've had a lot of death, but the biggest impact, of course, for me was my father. I have both my grandfathers passed away, and my grandmother, my paternal grandmother. But my dad, and of course I had some aunties and some uncles, but my dad was the biggest one. And I remember getting that call, and it's like, yo, you need to go home right now. They didn't even say what it was, but I knew what it was. And even as I knew what it was, I'm riding, I'm like, this is not gonna be what I know it is. And then I get there and see my mom and my sister and my brother. And again, I know what it is. As I'm walking across the street, I know what it is. But I'm like, nah, it's not this. And then they actually say, Dad died, and I'm falling down. But as I'm falling down, it's like I'm falling. I see an action. I see me doing what I was doing. If that makes sense. Like I'm outside.
Out of body.
Yes. And then of course the anger. We talking about anger. I think that kind of goes along with what I was telling y'all earlier about. Hey, I don't want to hold your hand and pray right now. That's not gonna bring him back. So that's the way that anger comes in at. And then bargaining. Is there?
I didn't get that one.
D, you can kind of help me with this one. I don't think I went through that. I don't think I saw that, and maybe I just didn't recognize it. But according to what we're learning,
So bargaining is where you come to the idea of an exchange sometimes, where like, God, I'll do your will if you bring this person back, or I'll stop drinking and I go to church, I'll get saved if you let this person come back, or it's really trying to do a trade-off, right? In terms of bring this person back and I'll do this forever, right? It's the notion that there is that somehow you can potentially, you're willing to give something or sacrifice something in replace of having that person.
You think it might be some guilt in there?
Absolutely.
It potentially can. Sometimes it can be guilt, but sometimes it ain't got anything to do with guilt, because when a person passes, like a lot of times we take responsibility for that, right? In different aspects of life. Well, if they called me 2 weeks ago, if I had been on, if I had just answered the phone, maybe they wouldn't have been where they was, or they, they wanted me to ride with them to the store, and I didn't go, man. If I had just gotten in the car, they wouldn't have had that car wreck. It's those type of things is where you're trying to really, and I take it as we're really trying to make sense of something, because oftentimes it's hard to process, like, how was I just on the phone with this person? How was I just at this person's house? How were we just laughing and cutting up? How were they just okay? And now you're saying they gone forever. Like, they gone, right? Like that's that notion of trying to really rationalize and trying to make sense of what doesn't oftentimes make sense.
Yeah, you say gone. Yeah, they
Gone.
gone.
I think with bargaining too, even let's say down to a physician, can you try this? Well, have we tried this? Well, let's try this again. When they've already concluded, and granted, again, if one is religious, has spiritual beliefs, he has the final say so, but still going back and forth with the physician or physicians about imposing some type of treatment after they've kind of already given you the end results. This is it, So I think that can be a form of bargaining too.
Yeah.
Got you.
And then you got the depression, which is another stage.
Yes.
That's kind of what everybody, You know, that's kind of self-explanatory. Everybody know, oh, I'm depressed because I lost this person. Yeah, eventually it gets to that point. And then acceptance. You know, I don't know if it says it in here, but my personal situation, you can accept it and not like, you accept it and you adapt because you accept it, right? You're not going to stop remembering this person.
Right.
You're not going to stop feeling some type of way. Again, if I watch those videos, sometimes I can watch them and then I'm good to go. I can just walk and keep on moving. And then sometimes it's like, oh, snap. Maybe I shouldn't watch that today. But you accept it for what it is. Even to this day, I still think, like, I look at my kids. There's a lot of things that my dad didn't get to witness. He didn't get to witness me having kids. He didn't get to witness me getting married. He didn't get to witness me going to college. And to go back to your point of what I could take from the death. Again, I remember my mom made me go to college, right? We talked about this in the college episode. She made me go. Of course, I got there. I was feeling myself and started learning. I was like, oh, I could do this. Well, here it is my junior year in school. School is fine. I get a manager telling me, hey, we want to make you an assistant manager at this restaurant that I was waiting tables at. And I was seriously considering, because they told me the amount of money I was going to make, I was seriously considering not graduating. And then my dad passed, and, you know, because he was proud of me for going to school. I was like, oh, I got to do this. I got to finish for him. So I don't know what would have happened had he not passed, but I know that definitely influenced me going ahead and finishing and graduating from there. So,
Can I point something out?
Yes, sir.
Depression, I thought something was real dope. Elizabeth Ross, 5 stages of grief. What she said about depression was it's a sort of acceptance with emotional attachment. I thought that was like a really powerful statement right there. I never really looked at it like this person is still emotionally attached to the thing that they are depressed about. You know what I mean? And that's where, I guess, where the depression comes from. Like, they know they've accepted, okay, they're gone, but it's like they're still emotionally attached. And then the actual stage of acceptance is becoming more objective to it.
Mm-hmm.
I can't control it. You know what I mean? So therefore, I'm not attached to it. I loved that person and their life. But I can't be constantly attaching myself to what we had, because in order to I want to say move on. I hate move on, but in order to pick up my pieces and go forward, I have to be able to be objective and let it be where it is.
In this model, this 5 stages of grief come from, as he referred to, Elizabeth Ross. When you're going for grief therapy, that doesn't mean that every therapist is going to go through this 5 stages of grief. I know when I'm doing it, that's not like my go-to. It's not. I know about it. I'm aware of it, but that's not what we're not going to go through these 5 stages to try to get you better, if that makes sense. But if I see you in a particular stage, I might try to give you some coping skills or interventions to address such. So we're coming to an end here. We want to give a shout out to Mr. Winston for his audio and visual productions. Check him out on winstonjstewart.com. Subscribe to Gravity on our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and whatever other social media platform we're on at this time. For your event needs, check out 6-1 Event Rentals. And yes, they got a 360 booth with red carpet.
Red carpet.
We'll share their link in the show notes. Life can be perfect. Picture perfect when you have the tools to focus your lens. Contact Kodak Ready Consulting Services. For more information, they have a website. They have a Facebook page, Kodak Ready, and we'll have the link in there as well. Let's talk about it, a flat platform of questions to make you think about life, health, family, culture, and so much more. Follow Young Garvey on all platforms. Young Garvey / Josh Williams, or AKA Josh Williams. Improve your mental health with therapy. Sit with a therapist. The conversation is different. When you sit with a therapist, the conversation is different. Visit my website, Gravity Counseling Group. We have wellness group, individual, family, and couples therapy workshops coming soon. Thank you for taking the time to listen. You could be doing anything in the world, but you chose to listen to us, and we appreciate that. Remember, I'm a therapist, but this isn't therapy. It's a podcast.